Hi, it is such a privilege to be here, and thank you to Doug Bush for inviting me here. It's not every day that I get a chance to introduce one of my role models. I'm really grateful to be alive in this current era, and I know that I benefit from the work that has been done by women like Elizabeth Stanton, who started the women's movement back in 1848, and Susan B. Anthony, who fought so valiantly for the right for women to vote, which actually didn't get ratified till 1920, well after she had died. And like my mom, who had raised me and my sisters and encouraged us to believe in ourselves. And I'm fortunate to be a working female citizen with voting rights, but I know that the fight isn't over yet. We are still far from truly being recognized as equals, and it's up to us to continue to reach for that ideal that our foremothers had envisioned for us. Women make up over 50% of the American population, yet the female vote continues to trail the male vote by at least 7 percentage points. What does that mean? That means that in election, for instance, like the past presidential election, the percentage of women who cast a vote for the winner was trailed the percentage of men who cast votes for the winner by 7%. Women may be over half of the American population, but the women's vote is not reflected in the final result. In government, women make up less than 15% of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate, and on average, women hold only 22.5% of the state legislative seats. There is a whopping 25% women in statewide executive elective offices, down from a high of 27.6% in 1999. We've made great strides over the past century, but it's concerning to see a uniform slide in all women progress over the past 5 years. We're really lucky here in Massachusetts to have a role model like Lieutenant Governor Carrie Healey to lead us away from this trend. Massachusetts currently can boast of having women make up 25% of our state legislature, but that still falls very short from representing the fact that we have over 51% women in Massachusetts. Lieutenant Governor Healey is also one of the 79 women who currently hold a state executive elected office. Carrie Healey was elected Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts in 2002 and serves as a key policy advisor to Governor Romney's leadership team, Lieutenant Governor Healey has taken on a broad range of assignments to advance the reform agenda. She is the primary contact for municipal leaders regarding local finance and budget issues and leads several key initiatives in public safety and criminal justice, her areas of expertise. From 1987 to 1997, Healey enjoyed a distinguished career as a law and public safety consultant at ABT Associates in Cambridge, Massachusetts. While at ABT, she conducted extensive research for the U.S. Department of Justice related to child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, gang violence, victim and witness intimidation, and the prosecution of drug crimes. Healey's findings led her to author 4 books and numerous articles focused on improving standards and practices throughout the criminal justice system. A Beverly resident, Healey has been an active member of the North Shore community. She's a past member of the Foundation Board of North Shore Community College and the Friends Board of Beverly Hospital. Healey successfully co-chaired the campaign to rebuild her city's library, raising over $1 million in private funds and grants. In 2001, she co-chaired Beverly's United Way campaign to support community development efforts. Healey also served as a member of the adjunct faculty at the Endicott College and the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, teaching criminal justice and social policy. Prior to her election, Healey was the chairman of the Massachusetts Republican Party and is credited with successfully re-energizing and expanding the party's grassroots base, laying the foundation for the party's current record-setting fundraising effort. Healey graduated from Harvard College in 1982 and received a bachelor's degree in government. She was awarded a Rotary International Scholarship in 1983 and earned a PhD in political science and law from Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. Healey and her husband, Sean, have been married for 19 years and have 2 school-aged children. May I present Lieutenant Governor Carrie Murphy Healey.
Thank you, Greer. It's great to be introduced by you. Number one, you have all the facts and figures out there, so I don't have to remember anything about women in politics. So that's perfect. Greer was one of our most spectacular candidates this past year, and spectacular in a number of ways. First of all, Greer's a mother. Your two beautiful children are here today. She had been a professional working for Fidelity, and when she came to us, she was the first Asian American woman to run for office on the Republican ticket in Massachusetts. And so thank you so much, Greer, for breaking that ground. And I will always remember at the Chinese New Year celebration of the Wong family reunion, going around with you table to table and meeting with all of the families, many of whom spoke exclusively Chinese, and the looks on the women's faces when they saw that you were the candidate, that I was an office holder, and that we were there together saying, women can do this. It was a very, very exciting moment. And I also realized that in the Asian community, many had traditionally been Democrats. But when they looked at you and they realized that the Republican Party was providing this kind of opportunity for women, it certainly, I think, changed a lot of people's views about what we represent and how we go about things. So it was a wonderful contribution you've made so far, and I know there are many, many more years to come. Thank you, Greer. Thank you all for being so patient, and I apologize for being late tonight. This is one of the problems of driving around Boston during rush hour, and I apologize for keeping you waiting. Your time is very valuable here when you're in college as well. I wasn't quite sure what to tell you tonight about being a woman in politics. I can tell you that it's not something I try to ever think about. In fact, I try not to think about it because I would like it to not matter. Unfortunately, as Greer pointed out, it probably does still matter. There is a degree to which women are not making it yet in politics, and perhaps that's something that we really need to take a step back and look at and ask ourselves, why is that the case? Why aren't more women willing to come forward and take the risks associated with running for office? And I think that there are probably several key issues there, and Greer could probably give us a much fresher sense of that than even I could, since I first ran for office back in 1998. So I've gotten much thicker skin and gotten quite dulled to some of the pain associated with being a public official. But one of the things, certainly, is the opening up of one's private life to outside scrutiny. And I think that for women, being judged publicly, being judged on the record in newspapers, seeing your photograph everywhere, certainly that wasn't something I was looking for, seeing my photograph anywhere, is something that's vaguely uncomfortable. There's something a little bit uncomfortable about that, and women are judged still in ways that men are not. And certainly the physical aspect and the appearance aspect of it is something that probably deters any number of people from really wanting to open themselves up to that. There's also just the question of the privacy of your family, and the fact that for the general years of your life when you're going to be having children and raising children, you wouldn't necessarily want to expose them to some of the scrutiny and some of the criticism that may accompany a public life. I asked my kids yesterday, so did you hear anything at school about the blue lights issue? Did anybody ask you about that, a couple weeks ago when that was in the news everywhere? And my daughter, who's in 4th grade, said no, she hadn't heard anything about it. Her friends hadn't mentioned it. But my son, who's 13, he said that someone had come up and mentioned it to him and just sort of asked him what it was about and so forth. But it wasn't adversarial. So I felt okay about that. But if they had been teased, if they had been harassed in some manner because of something I did on the public stage, I think that would have been hard for me. So I can understand that there are problems and there are reasons why women might hang back and think that maybe this is something they might want to do later in life or maybe not at all. On the other hand, tonight I'd like to tell you maybe why women would like to do this, or why anyone here in this audience might want to do this. Being in public life is genuinely one of the most rewarding avenues you can possibly have if you're interested in public policy, if you're interested in changing the world. I was recently home cleaning out my parents' house. My father recently died, and I went home last week to clean out all of their possessions. And one of the things my mother had done, which I wish she hadn't, was to save every single piece of paper from junior high school. Now, would any of you like to see the papers that you wrote in junior high school? Absolutely not. One of them was a list, though, of things that I was trying to write about what I thought about myself, how I felt about myself at that time, and obviously people in junior high school are really trying to figure out who they are. And there were a lot of sort of self-doubting comments, but the one thing that was absolutely positive that I knew was, I think, like number 9, and it said, I am very interested in participating in government and making a difference in this country, and I believe strongly in American values. And so I find it very interesting now to look back on that and realize that there must have been that seed of interest in serving, in being a part of the American experience, in making a difference in people's lives, even at a pretty young age. And I don't think anybody here would be here tonight, wasting a perfectly good Tuesday evening if you didn't have some of that in you as well. You must also have thought about these issues. Let me tell you how I came to be where I am today. As Greer mentioned in the bio that I hate to hear because it's so long and it seems very abstract to me, I started out at Harvard College. I was from Florida. I was not at all comfortable here in Massachusetts when I came. I'd spent my whole youth in Florida. I'd never owned a coat. I'd never seen snow. I was completely shocked. I'd never met anyone who was a communist. There's lots of them here in Cambridge. And so that was a huge surprise for me. One of my first birthday presents at Harvard was someone gave me Mao's little red book. That was a useful addition to my library. But so I had a lot to learn when I came to Massachusetts, but the one thing that I did notice was that this is such a vibrant intellectual community here, that there really are all types of people, and that the history here in Massachusetts was so rich. I knew that I wanted to stay in this kind of environment, this kind of learning environment, this kind of living environment when I raised my kids. So that was the first change that I made. I studied government, but I can tell you I also found my papers from Harvard, and I probably didn't do a very good job studying government at Harvard. I mostly became very interested in life in general, which is, I think, probably the more common course in college. Later on, however, when I went to Ireland and was getting my PhD, I did, in fact, get very interested in government and get very interested in the idea that laws and with interest now, judicial decisions change the way we live our lives and mold society. And I was always very interested in that nexus between how the laws we make change our society. And it seems like a simple point, but when you really start digging into it, it is extraordinary how we make choices about how our future society is going to look by the kinds of laws we pass. What would the family structure in America look like today, for example, if we had never had the welfare policies of the 1960s that rewarded illegitimacy? Would our marriage system be different today? Would our family structure be different today if that hadn't occurred? There are so many points along the way where we make choices about what we incentivize and what we don't incentivize. And so that was a very critical point for me in Ireland, because what I was looking at there was how do you balance human rights in an environment where we have a theocracy, in Ireland basically, at that time, and also in an environment where you have terrorism. And they were very interested in trying to preserve peace, to provide safety, all the things that we're concerned about in America now, but at the same time living with terrorists within their borders. And so now, here in America, 20 years later, those lessons seem very, very relevant to me. The whole question of balancing civil liberties and safety in a society. And we need to look at other cultures around the world that have been doing that for a number of years, like Israel, like Ireland, and learn from their lessons and decide, is that freedom enough? Is that safety enough? These are things where there are going to be trade-offs in America in the coming years. And I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to live in a culture that was struggling with those issues before I had to confront it here in America. After that, after I came back, just serendipitously, I was trying to find a way to put my husband through law school. Any job that would have paid me, I would have taken. And the first job that I was offered was something with a firm called Apt Associates, where they wanted me to do writing on criminal justice topics. Now, I'd never thought about criminal justice. There really wasn't a criminal justice category, if you will, at that point in time. No one could major in criminal justice. So everybody had to be sucked in from other areas and educated. And so I was as good as anyone else, and they took me. And they told me that if I could write a book on drug paraphernalia law, which is basically how did you close down head shops in the 1970s and 80s, in 3 months I could have the job. So I became the absolute expert on drug paraphernalia in 3 months, wrote the book, and kept the job. And in the process of this, I found a lifelong passion for criminal justice and went on to work for the Reagan administration around drug policy, the Bush administration around gang policy and witness intimidation by gangs, which I introduced some legislation to address here in Massachusetts only last week. I went on to work on the issues of domestic violence and child abuse and neglect during the Clinton years, and at that point became so frustrated with the general lack of interest on the part of our legislators in making any meaningful change that wasn't reactive, wasn't just bouncing off the day's headlines, that I thought I would go and run for office myself. Now, this is an incredibly crazy decision because I had probably not given a speech for 10 or more years. I had been working in a windowless cubicle, typing out these long books and reports for a number of years with very little contact with the outside world. I was not prepared in any way to be a politician. And so needless to say, I went out there, I gave very long policy topics about things I care deeply about, and I lost miserably. Nobody wanted to talk about those things. Worse yet, I was talking about child abuse, which before all the scandals around the clergy abuse was really a topic no one wanted to talk about whatsoever. So I found people fleeing the room, actually, when I got up to talk about the things I cared about often. Another 2 years, and I tried again. And in the meantime, I joined my party's structure. How many of you are aware of the state committee and what a Republican state committee does or a Democratic state committee does? A few of them. Well, we have the member right here. Here, you're a member of the Republican State Committee, so Christina, so you can raise your hand. But what these are official legal bodies where 80 members are elected, 40 men and 40 women, every 4 years, and they're elected right there on the ballot at the time of the presidential primary. Maybe you can look for them next time the presidential primary comes around. You can see that there are some other people there who you don't know, and they are the people who officially are the board of directors of your party. The Republican State Committee has 80 members, 2 from each Senate district, 1 man and 1 woman. And then from that, 1 man and 1 woman are chosen to serve on the national committee, the National Republican Committee, the RNC, and they represent Massachusetts. So the significance of that is I started trying to figure out what my party was doing. Why were we losing so badly? Why couldn't we increase our numbers instead of dwindling constantly? And when I got inside, I realized that what we hadn't been doing is, for one thing, this. We hadn't been reaching out to young people. We hadn't, in fact, any membership under 80, as far as I could tell. Visiting the Republican groups around the state, there was always 4 or 5 octogenarians sitting around a table going, "I can't believe Nixon resigned." They were just so unhappy and defeatist. And so there had to be something to energize the party. There had to be some way of getting out of this rut. And I wasn't sure what it was, but I did know after my second run that it wasn't going to happen by me getting elected or any other state rep getting elected. It had to happen through the party system, and I ended up running for chairman of the Republican Party. Now, this was a great moment for me because we were bankrupt. We were actually $90,000 in debt. We had 2 employees we couldn't pay. We were in some terrible office in Wakefield. And what else was going on? Well, we had no candidates recruited. This was the fall of 2001. Jane Swift was in deep, deep political trouble. and the Republican nominating conference was coming up in the spring, and no one had planned the convention. So I had plenty to do. And it was an exciting moment because you'll find that when things are really a mess, you'll get your greatest opportunities to make changes. You know, it's the whole, Chinese crisis opportunity thing that everybody always talks about. It's genuinely true. If something is enough of a mess, other people will allow you to rearrange it in the way you want to, which is really exciting. So I came in, we raised money, I got partners to come with us, we recruited candidates, and the most important thing was that Mitt Romney was willing to come back from Salt Lake City, and right on the heels of the Olympics, I might add 2 weeks after the end of the Olympics, and jump directly, without a vacation, without anything, into the governor's race here. And it really changed the direction, in my mind, of the Republican Party here in Massachusetts, gave it new hope, gave it a message that was coherent, because one of the things that we had really lacked was a sense of what it was to be a Republican in Massachusetts. We know it's not exactly like being a Republican in the Deep South or being a Republican in Oklahoma, but what did it mean? Because after Bill Weld, it meant sort of we were libertarians, but not quite libertarians. We still called ourselves Republicans, but what could it really mean that could cause enough people to come together behind this notion of being Republican to make a difference, to win a majority in a governor's race? And the key focus became reform. We were about reform. We were the party of Lincoln. We were the party of embracing minority participation. We were the party of helping women achieve their proper place in political life. The governor promised, and he has done it, that 50% of the people in our cabinet and in the highest level positions within our administration would be women. And they are. And I didn't think that that was such an extraordinary thing until I found out from the University of Albany, who did a study on the matter, that we're the only state in the nation who has that. We are the top one in the nation in terms of female participation in the important government offices that actually make policy, that actually do something. So I was very excited about working with him, and I was very excited to be able to be a part of this. And I can tell you that I have had more fulfillment from being able to work on the topics that I care deeply about, criminal justice and homelessness and social policy generally, than I couldn't possibly imagine. And it is worth the long hours, and I can tell you that they are long hours. It's worth the sacrifices to your family. I won't bring my kids here and ask that question, but I think they understand that I'm doing something that's short-term and important, and they're okay with that. And it is absolutely worth the risks. So if there's anyone out there, male or female, who has ever thought about stepping forward and saying, I want to be a candidate, I want to be a part of that, I hope that at some point you'll just do it, that you'll go to your party, that you'll go to the Republican Party, and explore the opportunity of being a candidate. And a good way to get a sense of what that might look like would be to work for a candidate. Go work for a candidate and look at it and see what that feels like up close, what that looks like. But I can tell you that looking at it is not the same as doing it. So it would feel different, but it feels good because you're not just watching, you're doing something. You're actually participating in life. So I encourage all of you to make that commitment, and thank you for having me here. What I'd really like to do is answer questions, because that's always the best part of any program. I can tell you that the first question after I went to an elementary school today, and I was encouraging them to spend their vacation studying for the MCAS. And it was a bunch of fourth graders, and they all had my bio, and the first question was, how has it been to be married to your husband for 19 years? I didn't answer that question. Okay. Yeah. Any questions from you guys that are less personal than that?
You guys want to form up?
Yes? Don't all come at once. Yeah. Okay.
I guess I'll take a stab at it. First
Thank
of all,
you.
thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. My question is, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how it is to be a Republican representative, or rather, you know, a statewide elected official in Massachusetts when there's this huge groundswell of opposition to a lot of the national Republican leaders, and how you sustain yourself against that, and how you feel Republicans can succeed given that sentiment here in the state.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was running for state rep, I tried to be pretty analytical about it. I had been a statistician for a number of years, so I took a survey and I asked people, how do you describe yourself? Republican, Democrat. And then I asked them, how do you describe yourself? Liberal, moderate, conservative. And the vast majority of people described themselves as conservatives, and the vast majority of people were registered as Democrats. So I couldn't quite wrap my mind around this, but it did occur to me that we need a Ronald Reagan-like realignment here in Massachusetts. We need someone to wake them up to the reality that a lot of people are much more conservative here than they think they are. And so the longer you spend in government in Massachusetts, the more you discover those people who are actually Democrats but who think like Republicans, who you can work with sometimes. And also you realize you're speaking to the silent majority a lot of times, that the media doesn't really represent the views necessarily of the majority of people. We could never have gotten elected if the media actually represented the views of the majority in Massachusetts. So if you just get out there and speak truth, then I think that you feel pretty good about it. Number one, because you're telling the truth. And number two, because I think most people kind of nod their head when you say, look, it's stupid to have two highway departments. Why do we have Mass Highway and the Turnpike Authority? Why don't we merge them and save taxpayers money? You know, a Democrat who makes sense is still going to say, yeah, that's right. Why wouldn't we do that? There's a whole lot of things that seem very political. Speaking out against the impact of unions on our state budget. Kind of a sacred cow, and you're not going to hear the Democrats doing it, but you know you're speaking the truth when you talk about what's driving the cost of every kind of service imaginable up for cities and towns. Well, you know, when you know your income as a city or town is going to grow at 2.5%, and you go out and give all your teachers and firefighters and police officers a 7% raise each year, something's going to go wrong. And I think people know that, and it's not about disrespecting unions or whatever, it's just about speaking truth. So I think it's hard being in the minority, but you have some weapons. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you for coming. I enjoyed your talk. In her introduction, Greer mentioned that you're one of her role models. So I just wanted to know who are some of your influences?
That's a very strange feeling, by the way. So
really? But who are some of your influences or role models?
Yeah.
Male or female?
One of the things that makes me realize that there really are a dearth of female role models is when someone asks me that questions. The things I come up with are so distant. And when I was in high school and college, I think probably the only female politicians who I knew and truly admired were Elizabeth Dole, who seemed so articulate and so poised, and she was from the South, and I was from the South, so I could sort of, imagine that maybe that would be me someday. And then at the time, though, she wasn't married yet. She had been a single woman and been in Congress, and I sort of assumed that maybe that would be the course, that I would never be able to marry if I wanted to do that. And the other role model that really comes to mind is Margaret Thatcher. And one of my greatest joys was to be able to watch Margaret Thatcher during question time with those wonderful trilled R's and that very acute mind. And I think to this day that I would love to be able to have a tenth of the skill that she has when she gave the speech that was recorded at Reagan's funeral. I think it was one of the most stirring tributes to Reagan ever given, and I certainly admire her. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I was just wondering, as college students now, how should we prepare ourselves for public life, either by helping people run or preparing ourselves for a political avenue? Because obviously we all have to be involved in public life in one way or another, whether watching it or whether being involved in it. And how should we prepare ourselves for that as college students?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I didn't get a chance to talk about when I was sort of blathering on earlier was the notion that I tried to educate myself about public policy issues, not just in my work, but also in my volunteer life. So I made a point of volunteering to be on the board of a hospital, or working with the United Way, or working around issues of higher education. I volunteered to be on a board to raise money for a junior college. And by each of those activities, I also volunteered at the Department of Social Services to evaluate foster care children in care, to decide whether or not they're receiving proper care and make sure that they weren't being abused again, and that sort of thing. And every time you do one of those volunteer activities, you will get a little insight into a policy world that you wouldn't otherwise have. And I can't tell you how many times it was really useful for me to have had that ground level experience with one field or another. And so I would encourage anybody who's interested in going into public life to try to reach out and have as diverse a personal experience with different areas that the government is involved with as possible, so that you bring with you yourself firsthand opinions about the things that need to be changed, or the things that you like, and the programs that you think are best, the approaches that you think are best. I think that that's very helpful to have. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you please speak a little bit more about choosing your career and your career path and raising a family, and like how you, how you balance that, and how it's stressful, or like how you deal with it?
Not at all. Yeah. It's it is something you have to plan out. And I think that that would be the main point that I would make to the women in the audience, is that to the extent that you want to have a career and have a family, it's not something that's just going to happen naturally. So you genuinely need to be very focused on choosing a career where you have flexibility in terms of the hours you can work, or flexibility around sick days or vacation, or whatever you think you might need with children. For me, I chose a career where I could work at 2 in the morning if I needed to. I was writing and doing research, and so my schedule was completely flexible. I could do it at home, and my goal was to publish something each year, so that my resume would remain current, and so that I would be able to stay in touch with the research community and attend all the conferences and really know what was going on in my field. And it was a pretty modest goal, publishing 1 article or 1 book a year. That was it. And once I did it, I went back and spent time with my kids. But I think it almost has to be something like that. Teaching is a good career. Consulting can be a good career. It has to be. There has to be an effort to maintain your resume during the years when you're having kids. And it can be at the most nominal level, and volunteer work can do a lot for that as well. Again, serving on volunteer boards, or doing projects in your community during those off years can help keep you current and active. But it is a real struggle, and I'm not going to say that it isn't. And I think you need very supportive family members. One reason that I can do what I do right now is because my mother-in-law lives next door to us, and she's very engaged in the raising of my children as well, and helps them. She's a former educator, and she's able to help them with their homework and help them get to their after-school activities when I can't. So raising kids is a lot of work, and you want to do a good job at it. And so don't underestimate how much effort is required. Thanks. Yes, please. Yes. Yeah.
I echo what Lieutenant Governor Healy is saying, but I also want to emphasize that I think a real key is when you are good at what you do, it puts you in a position to set the standard. I think I really lucked out. I didn't purposely look for a career that was in any way flexible. Goodness, I was in corporate America, the 9-to-5ers, nightmare. And I'm an engineer by training. But one of the things that I found was that, I wanted to have kids. We decided that we weren't going to wait. And when I had my first child, I was ready to possibly have to settle for something more part-time, or something a little bit more relaxed. And the thing was that my employer says, but I know you can get your work done, if you set your mind to it. What do I need to do so that you'll still work for us? what do I need to do to make it so that, because I don't want to have to hire somebody else to replace you. And I'm like, well, if you're willing to do that. Melody actually ended up treating me more like a special case, which wasn't the way that I would have liked to have it, but it gave me the idea that once I figured out that I could get my job done, and yet still at that point I had 2 young children, when I went to my next job where he said, help me formulate an overall employee plan that doesn't just let mothers work, but just supports a working family. And I was lucky to be in that position, but I do think that we're at a point when I was saying that we still have to fight the fight and to really pursue the ideal that our foremothers had envisioned for us. Is we got to get a little bit more creative. As long as I was sharing the common purpose of our business, and I was trying to make sure that the business continued to meet the bottom line, or whatever it was that my job was trying to do, that they saw that I was trying to do what they also wanted to have happen. They gave me more freedom of doing it my way.
Now, Greer, I'm gonna embarrass you right now, but I'm in my mid-40s. Are you in your mid-30s? Is that, or are you early 30s?
Okay.
No,
I just turned 40.
you just turned 40. Okay, so I'm about to turn 45. I think that things will get better over time, and the ideal should be that employers should recognize that people might want to take hiatuses out from work and then come back. What's very rare right now is for women to literally do that hat trick, to be a lawyer, be in business, do whatever they're doing full bore, and then stop, raise children, and then the question is, how do you get back in? Right now, there's no way to get back in. And I think that, for example, the governor has shown a great deal of open-mindedness and foresight in bringing a lot of women like me into the administration. His chief of staff has teenage kids, roughly the same age as my children. She has managed to be the chief of staff of a governor and still, take care of her kids, do what she needs to do. And she had been out of the workforce for a number of years with her kids. Our Secretary of Consumer Affairs similarly has young children and had taken time away from her career as a lawyer and now has cycled back in as a secretary. So that's very different than what women could expect in the past, and I'm hoping that corporate America will begin to look at women who've been out of the workforce for a certain number of years as a resource, as opposed to people who are outdated and not useful anymore. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. This is great. Thank you.